welcome to Harrison Hacks.
Hey guys, welcome back to Harrison Hacks. Today is the shootout video for the 3 different NES controllers that I want to test out. So basically, I mean, obviously we have the official Nintendo controller, and that's going to function just like it did in the 80s, obviously. So I just want to do the comparison of these two compared to the official NES controller. So we're going to start out, and the first one we're going to try out is the Retrobit NES Dogbone style controller, and we will cut to that footage just in a few seconds here. And after that, we will cut to the Hyperkin controller, and I will go through that, and we will do the same tests for each controller, same game, same everything, and then we will compare those to the official NES controller. So I'm going to cut to that footage right now, and we can get started. Okay guys, so right now we are using the Retrobit Dogbone style NES controller, and the first test I want to do is the 30-man code for Contra, the Konami code. So here we go, we're going to launch it up. So this is attempt number 1. And we got it, no problem. So next thing is to look for input lag, and I'm noticing 0. I hold down and I press to the left or the right on the D-pad. I really got to press firmly to move my guy around, which is nice because down means down. It doesn't mean I'm walking around or nothing like that. Down means down. So far, no issues. Let's do the bridge test. The reason why I'm using Contra for this test is if you guys watch the review videos for these controllers, you know that I can't beat Mike Tyson with them, so there's no point in me doing that test. I've already done it. But I did want to do the bridge test to make sure no input lag. And I wanted to do the Konami code. So I'm not going to make this video extremely long. I've put a lot of hours into each controller to ensure that I'm not just using a brand new controller that works perfectly. I wanted something like, okay, what's the longevity? And so each controller, I believe the Dogbone has a little bit more into it than the Hyperkin. As far as hours, I put about 30 hours into this and about 20 plus hours. I have 2 Hyperkin Cadets, and I put 20 plus hours into each of those. Whoops. Okay. So that is the Retrobit Dogbone style controller, and I must say that I've had 0 issues whatsoever, and you can watch my review video. I'll link that in the top right now. So what we're going to do is cut over to the Hyperkin Cadet and do the exact same test that we've just done now. Okay, and we're back, and I have the Hyperkin Cadet controller plugged in now, and we're going to go ahead and try the Konami code first. So let's load that up. Nope. So I'm going to do this test one more time. I have no issues with the Dogbone. Works every time. And no. So for some reason with the Hyperkin Cadet, I cannot get that code to work. I am not sure what's going on, why it's not working, but it's just not working. And I have no issues with the Dogbone controller from Retrobit or the official NES controller, which I will show you here soon. So let's do the bridge test. No problem. That was very easy. There's no input lag on the Hyperkin Cadet, so which is really nice. And I want to do all these tests on CRT so that I didn't have any input lag due to the television being a newer HD TV. So far so good. Now the other thing, well, except for the code didn't work, the other thing is I'm barely going to press right and barely going to press left on the D-pad. I'm holding down and just touch to the left and a slight touch to the right. So That's really bad. The D-pad on the Cadet, unfortunately, is just not that good. It worked slightly better when I first got it, and I was pretty happy. The cable length is longer than the dog bone controller, so I will say that. As well as there's some more weight to it. It's got some grips on the back. It's shaped like an original NES controller, which I like, except for the rounded corners in your palms are not there. They've kind of put the little slant there so that it doesn't dig into your palms. Now, I love the official NES controller. It's my favorite controller of all time, and this one is a nice feeling controller. I just wish that the D-pad was better. Unfortunately, the Hyperkin Cadet, the D-pad is just not that good. So that's going to be it for the Hyperkin controller. What I'm going to do now is use the official NES controller, and go ahead after that we will get to my final thoughts. Okay guys, so now I have the official NES controller connected, and we're going to start with the Konami code and go from there. So let's go ahead and launch up Contra. And that didn't work either. Wow. So the dog bone, no problem. Let me do this again. I usually don't have an issue with I'm going to try that again, guys. Sorry about that. I messed up there. It's not the controller's fault that time. It's me. And there we go. So I cannot get it to work with the Hyperkin Cadet. It does work with the dog bone from Retrobit. If I hold down, I mean, I'm not moving, you know. The jump is my adapter. I'm using that Retro Fighters adapter that no one should ever buy. I have to get a new Hyperkin one. I ended up getting rid of mine to somebody. And now I really want another one, so I'm going to grab a couple more of the Hyperkin NES to NES Classic Edition controller adapters. So you can go ahead and check out my Retro Fighters adapter, the NES to NES Classic Edition adapter review. And you can go ahead and check that out in the top right hand corner of your screen right now. So with this, obviously the bridge worked. I'm pressing left and right on my D-pad right now, and my guy ain't going nowhere. So with the original NES controller, obviously you're not going to have any issues. It works just like it should. The Hyperkin has the loosest D-pad. It's unfortunate because it is a nice controller, the Cadet, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that in my final thoughts. As far as, and this is just my gameplay, I'm just talking, really not paying attention here. Obviously the official NES controller works great. And so this is the shootout between the Retrobit dog bone controller, the Hyperkin Cadet, and the official NES controller. So let's get to my final thoughts. Okay guys, so my final thoughts on all three of these controllers is, I mean, let's be realistic. The NES controller works just as good 30 years later. My favorite controller of all time. Love that controller. As you saw in the testing for the Hyperkin Cadet, it could not do the Konami code, and I have had it work sporadically, but I mean, it's just a pain in the butt to keep trying and trying and trying. And the D-pad, for some reason, it feels good, but it doesn't function that well. So the good things about this controller, I'm not out to knock anything, but I have to be honest. The buttons feel great. The B and A buttons, they feel great. They really do. And they're concave, so your thumb fits in there nicely. Rubber start and select, feel really good. And the D-pad feels good, but just doesn't function good. So, unfortunately, I cannot recommend this. Now, between the three controllers, this is the second heaviest. It's a decent weight. It's got a long cable, a nice thick cable, almost comparable to the NES cable. So it's very close. But unfortunately, that D-pad, I mean, I know that there's tricks. You can put some tape inside on the contacts so that it's not so sensitive, which is something I may do in the future. And if it works, I'll do a how-to video on that. and we can go from there, because I do like this controller. If the D-pad was working like this D-pad, or even that D-pad, I would just fall in love with this controller. It's very comfortable. As you can see, if you're not a fan of this corners digging into your palms, which I love, it just gives me that feel when I was a kid, then this one here bends down and you don't feel it at all. And then lastly, we're going to talk about the Retrobit. There we go, we get some focus. The Retrobit dog bone style controller. So this controller here is extremely light. The cable is extremely thin and not very long. But the buttons are plastic. The start and select are a plastic instead of a rubber, which I don't really mind. It's just start and select. You know, I prefer the rubber, but it's not so bad. These are convex as opposed to concave, but it doesn't bother me as much as I thought it would. And the D-pad functions fairly well. I mean, nothing's going to beat your official controller, but for a cheap third-party controller, I would say that this controller holds up really well. Now, what I would like to do with this is pop it open, and if there's some room in there between the board and these grooves here, or not grooves, but this rounded part, is just hot glue some bolts in there, or some nuts in there, and just to give it a little bit more weight. It throws me off how light it is, but it's a really cool controller, and I do enjoy playing with it. Now, I gotta say that obviously NES wins, Retrobit comes in second, and Hyperkin comes in third. Now, if I do the tape trick inside of the Hyperkin on the contacts for the D-pad, and it functions much better, then that's going to one-up the Retrobit. But that's a what if, and you shouldn't have to do that when you're purchasing a product. You should be able to plug it in and enjoy it. So this is my final thoughts between the three controllers. You guys saw all the tests, and I do have two of the Hyperkin Cadets, and both of them I'm having the same D-pad issues. So there's really, I believe it's just throughout that controller. I mean, maybe I got two the same that have bad D-pads. I'm not sure, but that I've just got to be honest. So obviously NES, Retrobit, and then Hyperkin. I really appreciate you guys watching. Please like that, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, have a good day.